Hello, my friends, and welcome back to Meerkat Musings. Welcome back to my oh-so-wonderful YouTube channel where you can listen to my wonderful, deep, melodic voice. Let the sound of my voice soothe you. Okay, maybe not. So where am I going with this particular video? Well, on this particular video, I want to talk about elections. Now, I know politics is sometimes a boring subject, but it is also a subject which carries a great deal of impact upon our lives in so many ways. As a kid, politics is quite boring. I don't think there's any getting around that. And I think as we become teenagers and we begin to show a bit more of an interest and awareness in it, because we almost have to. And I think, it becomes a topic which permanently sort of exists, I guess, as we move into adulthood. Although it's also a subject which we're always told, I was certainly told when I first started work, that you don't discuss it at work. I was told there were two topics that you don't talk about in the workplace, which was politics and religion. Now, as it happens, I have had a number of discussions about politics and religion at work more than once, but hey-ho, I guess it was a suggestion rather than a hard and fast rule. Anyway, elections. So, there are two elections I want to focus upon, which are happening. Well, in theory, they're both happening this year, although one could be delayed until the very beginning of next year. In principle, there will be a general election here in the UK. There certainly will be one by the end of January next year to determine the next UK government. And there will also be, and this will definitely happen, barring something very unforeseen, a presidential election in the USA, and I believe that's in November. They tend to have theirs on a kind of tight, almost clockwork-like schedule, whereas in the UK we tend to have a slightly less rigid approach to when we hold them. We'll focus on the UK first of all, because I am, of course, British, and therefore that's my focus. With the UK, one of the things that a lot of people have been clamouring for of late is indeed an election. People want change. The Tories exist in a world of denial regarding this, but the overwhelming consensus, the overwhelming mood here in the UK is that people want an election and they want the chance to have a change. It's looking like the Tories will get absolutely hammered at the next election, although, important note here, lots of polls that predict the outcomes don't necessarily tend to reflect the mood on polling day itself. But if there's any truth to the current situation, then the Tories could find themselves with barely over 100 seats in Parliament, a huge crash from where they currently exist. At the last general election, they had a majority of 80 seats, which is quite significant. But this time around, it could be that Labour have a majority of over 100 seats themselves, perhaps 120, 130, perhaps higher. So it'll be a huge turnaround as far as the government's concerned. And you can sort of understand in some respects, however selfish their motives might be, why the Tories are doing everything they can to avoid having an election. They want more time to presumably limit the damage, but they must realise by now that their chances of winning the next election are more or less done and dusted. And they're done and dusted because anyone with a pair of eyes and even a semi-functioning brain can take a look at their record over the last 14 years and see that it's been quite painful. And it's been especially painful from the moment that we had Boris Johnson in charge, who remains, if you ask me, one of the worst prime ministers this country has ever had. But we also can't forget the impact, as much as it gets played down in some quarters, the impact of Brexit upon the UK's economy and society. And funny enough, we can actually put part of that on Boris Johnson, among others, and that will go down as something which has been a divisive and rather terrible Tory legacy. So we've had basically a poop show, to use a slightly more polite term than I could, over the last 14 years, which over the last 4 or 5 years has become progressively worse. So we've had a shambolic state of affairs involving Brexit. We had the botched handling of the COVID pandemic. I will cut a little bit of slack with the pandemic, just purely on the grounds that it was one of those things that caught the entire world by surprise, but I still don't think that the Tories handled it particularly well. We had Partygate, of course, whereby the Tories believed that they could flout their own rules to enjoy themselves, while other people couldn't say goodbye to their loved ones. I think that still sticks in the public memory because people won't forget that kind of utter betrayal and hypocrisy. We've had the mishandling of the NHS. The Tories hate the NHS. It serves an important purpose. It's far better than the privatised system that we see in the USA. But the Tories hate it because they can't make money out of it. And one of the key interests of the Tories is money. Money links to power. The Tories crave power. They hunger for it. And they don't really give a damn what happens to anyone else. So they loathe the NHS because they don't benefit from it directly. We've seen how they've helped oversee a harsh cost of living problem as well. There were solutions they could have employed, but they chose not to because, again, it would hit their bank balances. They're already, in many cases, quite well off, but that doesn't matter. They want to be more well off, and they don't really care about the impact of the cost of living because they don't live in the real world. We've had untreated sewage being pumped into our rivers, lakes and beaches because, once again, the cost of fixing that problem is not worth the Tories' time. They vote to allow this to continue while talking about looking after the environment. Says it all, really. So throughout all of that, we've just had a shambles, an absolute shambles. And it's long past time that we had a change. Now, I can't say that I am particularly thrilled with lots of the ideas coming out of Labour. They have so often, under Keir Starmer, sat on the fence about things, and there is an argument that they are, in many respects, not that different to the Tories in some regards. What I want to see them do is, among other things, is campaign on a platform of nationalising public services like energy and water, because it's ridiculous how we are currently ripped off by suppliers. You look at elsewhere in Europe where things like energy supply are handled, at least in part, by the government. They haven't endured remotely the kind of ridiculous increases in costs that the British public have faced. Labour should be thinking, if they're meant to be the party for the many, about how they would bring some of this stuff back into public ownership. I know it's perhaps a time-consuming and perhaps even an expensive exercise, but it would be much, much better for the British public in the long run. But Labour don't make enough noise along those lines, and they just seem to be going out of their way to please everyone, which, of course, ultimately means they'll end up probably pleasing no one. But they are, in my view, the lesser of two evils by some margin compared to the Tories. And Labour will get my vote on election day just because I don't want there to be any possibility that the Tories wind up getting back in again. One interesting thing about the Tories is that they are not only facing a wipeout at the hands of Labour, but part of the reason for that is because they are in something of an internal crisis. There are members of the Tories who have defected to the Reform Party being a hard right party, in many respects driven by anti-immigration ideology. They are slowly but surely cutting into Tory vote share, and that, with that splitting of the right wing vote, so to speak, makes it even more likely that Labour will have a landslide victory. So it's looking like this kind of, I guess, division within the UK political right will actually, in an interesting way, benefit the country, because it will almost certainly guarantee not only will the Tories lose, but it will ensure that they lose very, very badly. And then once Labour are in, I guess we can see what they are truly going to stand for. What I would love them to do, but I don't think they're going to do this by any means, is to actually properly and definitively challenge Brexit. But I don't know if Labour are going to do that. To be fair, even under Jeremy Corbyn, a man who I think would have been a much better Prime Minister than Boris Johnson, even Corbyn was a little bit on the fence about Brexit. He didn't pick a definitive stand one way or the other. If he had campaigned for, getting rid of Brexit, for reversing Brexit, then he would have been vilified by some. If he'd campaigned for supporting Brexit, he would have been vilified by others. So he chose to more or less sort of say nothing on the subject, or suggest very little on the subject. And I think that backfired in a more broad sense. But Labour in general have talked recently about trying to make Brexit work, but I think Brexit won't work. We've had quite a few years now in a post-Brexit world, and we've had plenty of time to realise the mistake that it is, and we just need someone in government, more than anything else, to say, right, this experiment's failed, let's go about rejoining the EU and moving forward. It would be better for everyone if we did, but I don't know if that's going to happen. But yeah, I think overall I will definitely be voting Labour, just because, as much as anything, the country cannot afford another 4 to 5 years of this shambolic Tory performance. We've had, I've lost track of how many prime ministers we've had come and go in recent years, and with one crisis after another, and it's just it's time that they were done. They're overdone, and you just really at this point need them to say, right, you know what, we're going to have an election, we're going to get it done with. Instead, they're limping on, no doubt, raiding the public coffers for their own ends as they do, and they're doing the country no favours by effectively being a walking corpse at this point. So we'll just have to wait and see for when they actually decide to finally pull the trigger and say, let's have an election. In America, as I say, it's different. In America, they have elections every 4 years, like clockwork. It's quite kind of set in stone almost, I guess, as to how they go about this process. I'm sure there can be exceptions if needed, but they tend to do these things in a very particular way. In America, things are even more polarised than they are in the UK. Only a cursory glance across the pond will reveal this. You don't even need to look particularly hard to see just how divided the US political scene is, with Democrats and Republicans often butting heads over almost everything. And it makes you wonder how anything ever actually gets done in that particular political system. We've got a campaign between two, at this point, rather old men in the form of Biden and Trump. It's ironic in many respects that some Republican supporters were, of course, making comments about Biden's age at the last election. Trump is now the same age as Biden was at the last election, and oddly enough, all of a sudden, Republicans don't seem to have quite the same problem with his age. I mean, Trump is 77. He's not a young man by any means. Republicans have made jibes about Biden's, mental and cognitive powers, but Trump has shown his own vulnerabilities in that regard. And of course, in many respects, once again, Republicans tend to ignore that because well, to be blunt, they're often rather hypocritical, to put it mildly. Trump has a number of legal issues to battle. As I record this video, his trial over hush money to a porn star and the associated financial irregularities with that has begun. And this is the first time in history that a former US president has actually been brought up on criminal charges. So that's created quite a stir. How that reflects upon the polls on election day, anybody's guess. Trump's supporters will rally around him as they always do, almost irrespective of what he says and does at this point, because a lot of them have almost come to worship him. They see him as this kind of messiah, and any decision, any vote, anything at all that goes against Trump will automatically be rejected as some form of conspiracy. They will not accept anything that is not pro-Trump. So, of course, that creates a problem. You can ask them, is there any standard of evidence, anything at all that they will accept that shows Trump to be, in error or to be crooked or anything like that? And I honestly don't think there'll be anything that they'll be prepared to accept. Any decision that goes against Trump at this point will be branded a conspiracy and rejected. And that will be the case, I think, no matter how clear the evidence is. So how do you kind of get around that? The answer is I don't know that you can. You can present facts to these people, but if the facts don't fit their narrative, they're absolutely not going to listen. They're going to reject them out of hand. We've seen that before. So how do Democrats play this? Democrats have their own problems, actually, linked largely to the events going on in the Middle East. A lot of Democrat supporters are not happy with the stance Biden has taken with Israel and the crisis in Gaza. They feel Biden should actually be doing more to try and rein Israel in, and they're not pleased at how he hasn't been, perhaps, so we say, strong enough in that regard. And my suspicion is that if it wasn't for the case that Trump was on the ballot, that some Democrats simply wouldn't vote at all. They would abstain, which would almost certainly lead to a Republican victory. But because Trump is on the ballot, I know some Democrats who are going to vote for Biden, even if it means they might feel sick to their stomachs to do so, because they know Trump would be the worst of two evils in this situation. How it all plays out, of course, is anybody's guess. We already know what 4 years of Trump looks like, and it wasn't exactly a success show by any means. We know what 4 years of Biden looks like, and okay, I'm not saying this from across the pond, but I think it's been better than Trump. Whether it's been significantly better is a different question, but I think either way, Biden is the better of the two candidates, despite some of his, shall we say, mishandlings of situations. But you know what, as I said at the beginning, when the elections roll around, who knows what's going to happen? There'll be passionate and perhaps angry and bitter campaigns. There will be claims and counterclaims. In the USA, there'll be televised debates, which of course can get quite fiery. There's a lot of uncertainty, certainly with the US election, as to which way it will go. In the UK, it's almost a certainty as to how it's going to go, but we just need the Tories to say enough is enough. We are going to call an election and not drag this out any further. Whether they have the conviction and integrity to actually do that or not anytime soon, well, we're talking about the Tories here. Integrity doesn't really go hand in hand with them, but all we can do is just keep our hopes up and pray for a miracle.